Someone stops replying. Not completely, just enough for you to notice. And before a single thing has actually changed, before any evidence exists, before anyone has said a word, a thought appears. Not loudly, not directly. It disguises itself as anxiety, as jealousy, as the sudden need to work harder, to be more useful, more impressive, more available, more unforgettable. But underneath all of that activity, underneath every extra effort, is a question that never quite leaves. What if someone else could take my place? And what makes that question so difficult is that it is never really asking about competition. It is asking something much older, much more personal, much more frightening. If someone else appears, will I still matter? That is the fear. Not losing a role, not losing a title, losing the certainty that you belong. And in a world built around endless options, that question has become harder and harder to silence. We live in a culture of constant comparison. Every platform quietly carries the same message. There is always another option. There is always someone else. Someone more successful, more attractive, more talented, more productive, more desirable. And the mind, which was never designed to process this volume of comparison, begins asking questions it was never built to answer continuously. Am I enough? Am I memorable? Would someone choose me again if they had every possible option in front of them? The modern world rarely asks these questions out loud. It asks them through numbers, followers, performance reviews, metrics, rankings, algorithms, ratings. Everything starts feeling measurable. Everything starts feeling comparable. And when everything becomes comparable, belonging starts feeling conditional, as though your place must constantly be earned, as though acceptance has become a competition you never agreed to enter. And that is where many people begin living, not in connection, but in maintenance. Constant maintenance, trying to secure their place, trying to make themselves indispensable, trying to make replacement impossible. The problem is that no amount of effort ever fully solves that fear, because the fear was never really about competition. It is about something much older, something that existed long before social media arrived, something learned long before adulthood. The fear of being replaceable rarely begins in adulthood. Adulthood simply gives it new places to hide. For many people, it begins with a lesson that is never spoken directly, a lesson absorbed through experience. The lesson sounds something like this: you are most valued when you are useful. Sometimes that lesson appears through praise. The child who performs well receives attention. The child who achieves receives approval. The child who helps receives affection. None of this is necessarily harmful on its own. The problem appears when a child slowly begins connecting worth with performance, not consciously, emotionally. They start noticing patterns. When I am helpful, people seem happier. When I succeed, people seem proud. When I make life easier for everyone, I feel accepted. And eventually, something subtle shifts. Belonging starts feeling conditional. Not "I am loved," but "I am loved when." I am loved when I perform. I am loved when I achieve. I am loved when I make myself valuable. The distinction is small, but its consequences can last for decades. Because children don't simply learn how the world works, they learn how they must exist within it. And once usefulness becomes the safest path to acceptance, usefulness becomes identity. Being needed starts feeling more important than being known. This pattern follows people into adulthood without announcing itself. The employee who always says yes, the friend who is always available, the partner who constantly adapts. The person everyone depends on. On the surface, these people often seem highly capable, reliable, generous. And many of them genuinely are, but underneath that reliability is sometimes a quiet fear they rarely discuss. The fear that if they stop contributing, their place becomes uncertain. And so they continue performing, not because someone demanded it, but because somewhere deep inside, performance became associated with security. So they work harder, give more, offer more, become the person nobody can do without. And for a while, it works. The fear quiets. Every act of usefulness creates a small feeling of security, a small piece of proof that you matter, that you are valuable, that you are needed. And being needed can feel very similar to being loved, which is why so many people confuse the two. But they are not the same thing. Being needed depends on what you do. Being loved depends on who you are. And that difference becomes important when life inevitably changes. Because nobody can perform forever. Nobody can always be useful. Nobody can always be available. And when the performance slows, when a mistake happens, when rest is needed, the fear returns, louder than before. This creates a cycle that becomes surprisingly difficult to escape. The fear creates effort. The effort creates temporary security. The security fades. The fear returns. The effort increases. Again and again. The person keeps climbing, but the feeling of safety never fully arrives, because the goal itself is impossible. You cannot become unreplaceable. Not in a workplace, not in a friendship, not in a relationship, not in life. Every organization survives departures. Every group changes over time. Every relationship evolves. Trying to become permanently irreplaceable is like trying to stop time itself. And yet enormous energy is spent attempting exactly that. Not because people are irrational, because they are afraid. Afraid of what replacement seems to mean. Not losing a role, not losing a title, losing significance, losing belonging, losing evidence that they matter. And nowhere does this become more visible than in the modern world. A world that constantly measures value, constantly compares, constantly rewards visibility. A world where the fear of being replaceable doesn't simply exist, it gets fed every single day. Because abundance doesn't only show you opportunity, it shows you competition. Social media shows you thousands of lives, thousands of faces, thousands of possibilities. Dating platforms present potential partners like endless catalogs. Professional networks showcase people achieving more, earning more, building more. And the mind, which evolved in environments where belonging depended on a small tribe, now feels connected to the entire world. The result is often a kind of psychological overload, an awareness of what you are not, an awareness of who you are not, an awareness of where you fall short. And when that awareness becomes constant, insecurity finds fertile ground. The person begins feeling as though their place depends entirely on results, on output, on performance. And when that mindset expands beyond work, something quietly changes in relationships too. A friend makes a new friend. A partner develops new interests. Someone becomes close with another person. And suddenly the mind starts evaluating, comparing, calculating. Do they enjoy that person's company more than mine? Are they more interesting, more valuable, more important? Notice what happens here. The relationship is no longer being experienced, it is being analyzed. The person is no longer connecting, they are assessing their position, their security, their replaceability. And that is one of the hidden costs of a world built on endless options. When alternatives become highly visible, belonging starts feeling unstable. Not because people are actually leaving, but because the possibility becomes impossible to stop imagining. Eventually, every fear reveals the question hiding underneath it. And the fear of being replaceable hides a question so uncomfortable that many people spend years trying not to hear it. The question is not, "Am I good enough?" It is something deeper. Would I still matter if I stopped proving myself? For some people, that question lands immediately. For others, it takes a moment. Because proving yourself can become so normal that it no longer feels like effort. It simply feels like life. You work hard, you help people, you adapt, you contribute, you improve, you stay useful. And eventually those behaviors stop feeling like choices. They start feeling like requirements, like the price of admission, like what must be paid in order to remain valuable. This is where many people become exhausted without understanding why. Not because they are working too hard, not because they are giving too much, but because they are trying to maintain an identity that was built around earning security. And earned security is never fully secure because it always requires renewal. Validation answers the question temporarily, but it never removes the question itself. The question simply returns. The employee receives recognition, then worries about maintaining it. The creator gains an audience, then worries about losing it. The partner feels loved, then worries about whether that love will last. Because the achievement was never the real answer. The problem was where value was being located. If value lives entirely in performance, performance must never stop. If value lives entirely in usefulness, usefulness must never decline. And that creates a life built on maintenance rather than belonging. The person is no longer asking, "Who am I becoming?" They are asking, "How do I avoid becoming less valuable?" Those are very different lives. One moves toward something, the other constantly tries not to lose something. And that is why the fear of being replaceable becomes so consuming. Because what feels at risk is not a position, not a title, not a role. What feels at risk is the right to matter. But here is what the fear almost never tells you. Significance doesn't come from being irreplaceable. No relationship survives because one person is objectively the best human being available. No friendship survives because one person permanently outperforms all alternatives. People stay because of experiences, history, trust, vulnerability, shared moments, understanding, presence. Things that cannot be measured, things that cannot be ranked. And that realization creates an entirely different question. Not, how do I become impossible to replace, but why do I believe I have to earn a place that was never supposed to be earned? Think about the people who matter most in your life, the people whose presence changed you, the people you genuinely care about. Are they there because they were the most efficient, the most productive, the most impressive? Probably not. They are there because of shared experiences, conversations, trust, the countless small moments that slowly became something real. Those things don't appear in performance reviews. They don't appear on leaderboards. Yet they are often the very things that make someone truly irreplaceable. Not because nobody else exists, but because nobody else lived that exact story with you. Nobody else occupied that exact space in your life. Nobody else became that specific person. And that reveals something important. People are not interchangeable in the way fear imagines. Alternatives will always exist. There will always be someone smarter, more attractive, more talented, more successful. The world has never struggled to produce alternatives, but human connection has never been built on finding the single best option. It is built on shared meaning, and meaning cannot be duplicated so easily. The fear of being replaceable wants certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants permanent proof. But relationships were never designed to provide guarantees. They were designed to provide connection. And those are different things. Because belonging doesn't ask, "What can you offer?" Belonging asks, "Can you be here?" Belonging doesn't ask, "How useful are you?" Belonging asks, "How honest can you be?" Belonging doesn't ask, "Why should we choose you?" Belonging asks, "Will you let yourself be known?" And perhaps that is the truth hiding underneath all of this. The fear was never really about losing your place. It was about never feeling certain that you had one. Because when a person spends enough years believing they must earn belonging, they eventually forget that belonging was never supposed to be earned. Only experienced, only shared, only lived. And maybe the goal was never to become impossible to replace. Maybe the goal was to stop treating yourself like something that needed to compete for the right to exist. Because the people who matter most were never looking for the best option. They were looking for a person. And no matter how many alternatives the world creates, there has only ever been one of you.